I have been Alice in that reading. Treading water, trying to find solid ground, and reaching out to anyone around me. "Oh, Mouse," she says, "do you know the way out of this pool? I'm so very tired of swimming about here. Oh, Mouse." Trying to connect and instead pushing away the very people I'm trying so hard to reach out to. I want to tell you a story that happened to someone among us. A member of this church who agreed that I could share her story. She'd never done such a thing before, but she remembered having seen in her brother's Latin grammar. Our member grew up not far from Tulsa, comes to church regularly, donates her money to many causes that fight that very oppression, both individual and institutional. She considers herself very open-minded. She even tears up when she hears Martin Luther King's "I Have a Dream" speech. She's pretty savvy when it comes to understanding power and influence. And for the sake of this story, it's important for you to know that she is also white. Several years ago, she was working for a company that required her to do a lot of traveling to small towns across the South and the Southwest. So she would spend weeks at a time in this particular hotel in Kentucky. And on one particular trip, she stopped at the desk when she checked in to remind them that while she was there, there was no need to change her sheets every day, no need to waste their time or the water. And the next morning, as she was leaving her room and about to step onto the elevator, she saw a woman leaving another room down the hall coming towards her. She assumed that this woman was cleaning the rooms on the floor. And so as she got into the elevator, she said something down the hall like, "Don't worry about cleaning my room, I'm good." And as the words left her lips, she realized her mistake. This woman was not in a hotel uniform. She was not wielding a cleaning cart, but she was African American. The woman bristled and said, "I'm not a maid." The congregant looked her in the eye and then at the floor and said, "I'm sorry." But the damage was done. It was as though time had stopped and then actually reverted hundreds of years of progress seemingly stripped away by one single assumption. The elevators closed, leaving the All Souls member alone with herself in the elevator. She was ashamed, and she had no idea what to do. Lewis Carroll tells us, "Oh, I beg your pardon," said Alice hastily. The mouse cried in a shrill, passionate voice, "Would you like cats if you were me?" "Well, perhaps not," said Alice in a soothing tone, "and yet I wish I could show you our cat Dinah. I think you'd take a fancy to cats if you could only see her. She's such a dear, quiet thing." When I read that passage, I wanted to leap into the pages and save Alice so badly. I wanted to scream at her, "Alice, just stop talking. Stop talking and listen. Listen." When I heard about the story of our member on the elevator, my heart ached for her. That single event countering everything she believed she was. A single moment that felt as though it could define her. It was as though she'd become the very thing that she'd been struggling against her whole life in a single mistake. It made her doubt who she was and whether or not she had the power to do anything about it. Now, I have not only been Alice, I have also been the mouse. Maybe you have too. Treading water, on a mission to get out of whatever mess I was currently in, and directly and as quickly as possible, when I was thrown off course by an insult or the ignorance of another. When we are offended, it can be like a scratch on a record that repeats itself over and over and over again in our minds, leaving us stuck within its very grooves. Who do they think they are? When we unintentionally offend, it can have the same effect. The situation looping over and over again in our minds. Who do we think we are? Back in the hotel in Kentucky, the event consumed our member all day long. She had to do something to let the woman know that she wasn't that way. She wanted to tell her that she'd worked hard not to be that way, and to let the woman know that she would work harder than ever to prevent it from happening again. She wanted so desperately to be in relationship with this woman, to make amends. And so she confessed to people she knew all day long and asked what they thought she should do. Most of them told her to forget it, that they knew her, they had a larger context. They said it was an accident, a fluke. They said her intentions were good and how badly this hurt her. They told her that there was nothing she could do to change what had already happened, and that reaching out to the woman might, in fact, even make it worse. Our member thought that they might be right. She would only be able to apologize for one incident in an elevator, one small part of a larger systemic issue that she felt she was actively perpetuating in that moment, even though she wanted nothing more in the world than for that to end. She understood that she couldn't undo racism with a single apology, or undo the history of the South, or undo her personal history of growing up as a child in a town where her primary contact with African Americans in the 60s and 70s was the service staff. She felt the burden of oppression over the course of America's history. How could she reach across the chasm of all of this when there's nothing binding the two of them together? When they're not forced or required to be in relationship? When either one of them could just walk away? As the mouse, when we experience repeat offenses from anyone, a cat or a dog, the same person, or even the same offense from different offenders, patterns begin to form from those grooves. We move beyond the repetition of the mind, of the story twisting in our head, and begin to form patterns in our own hearts, patterns of protection. I have not only been Alice and the mouse, but I have been the cat and the dog. Objects of hatred, of categorization and stereotype. I have overheard others come to my defense, only to complicate the issue or even sometimes create a wider gulf between myself and the person that I really should be in relationship with. Back at the Kentucky hotel, this congregant tried to get the woman's room number from the all-white hotel staff. It was a small Kentucky town, and the hotel desk informed her that the woman had already checked out. She told the clerk the story. She told the clerk that she had to do something in order to make it right. And the clerk, trying to help our member, gave her the woman's home address. Something that likely never would have happened if the reverse racial order had been at play and a black woman was seeking a white hotel guest's address from the all-white staff. But when our sister, our congregant, looked at the address, she nearly fainted. The woman whom she had offended lived in Tulsa. There are multiple ways in which we use the word offense. An offense is something that outrages the moral or the physical senses, and also describes the state of being insulted or morally outraged. An offense is a breach of moral or social code, or an infraction of the law, a stumbling block. Now, maybe it's because I grew up here in Oklahoma, but I actually use two different pronunciations of the exact same word, depending upon the context. We've been talking up till now about taking or giving offense, right? Offense. But in sports, I say offense. Now, maybe it's too many Friday night football games of dividing the word into a cheer. But the offense is an assault. It's an act of attacking, of attempting to score. It refers to the members of a team attempting to score. And I would argue that an offense or an offense is anything that causes us to lose sight or focus of our goal. To offend gets in the way of our goal, unless we're playing football. And to be offended gets in the way of our goal as well. You see, offense divides the players into opposing teams playing against one another by its very nature. So an offense is seeing the person not as a person but as an object or a category. An offense could also be, for example, rejection or judging or jealousy or hate. Anything that gets in the way of a goal, strife or argument, a bad mood or gossip. Something as serious as addiction or resentment. That night in the Kentucky hotel, our member wrote the woman whom she had offended a letter. It was brief. She knew that she would be lucky if the woman even took the time to read it. She apologized again. She admitted that this never would have happened if the woman had not been black. She said how ashamed she was, how disappointed she was in herself, thinking that she was better than that, completely beyond offense. She let the woman know that she was expecting nothing in return, but that she just wanted to own what had happened. Alice called softly, "Mouse dear, do come back. We won't talk about cats or dogs either if you don't like them." When the mouse heard this, it turned around and swam slowly back to her and said in a low and trembling voice, "Let us get to the shore, and then I'll tell you my history, and you'll understand why it is I hate cats and dogs." But no one is beyond offense. If we're going to be in relationship with another human being and honor both their uniqueness and their humanness, their distinctiveness, then we have to recognize that we have similarities and differences. We honor one another when we can see those differences and not dismiss them away, when we can hold on to the complexity and still embrace humanity. Several days later, a letter came in the mail for our member. The woman wrote that she was in Kentucky to bury her brother, and so she was swimming in her own pool of tears. She said she was grateful that our member had taken the time to write and to admit that she was wrong. And in the letter, the woman said that she assumed that our member must be a Christian to have owned up to such an error. She is in fact an atheist. And in any other circumstance would have likely been argumentative and offended at the thought that someone would have to be a Christian in order to have the values and morals that she was displaying. But this time, she would not let that stand in the way of her goal. When we are in relationship, we risk offense regularly. If we can recognize that even in repeated offenses such as Alice's, that the goal is to connect, to be understood and to understand. Lewis Carroll highlights some important takeaways from his pool of tears. Alice and the mouse were treading water. In a sense, we're all treading water beneath the surface, trying to survive in a world that is filled with so much opportunity and so much pain. Trying to make sense of our lives and do the best we can. After you have offended, apologize, and then shut up and listen. And if you're given the opportunity, do more listening than talking. If you have a sense but that you've offended and you're not sure, ask and then listen. Get curious about the other person's experience. Don't merely defend or continue to justify your own. In Carol's story, we see that after an offense, the person who is offended actually holds the power to decide whether or not the relationship will continue. Even after multiple offenses, Carol's mouse held the goal over and above anything else, the ultimate goal, to connect, to be understood. Let us, he says, let us get to the shore. The mouse included Alice. He did not separate himself from her. The mouse chose not to avoid or to wall off. He instead chose to connect and risked being vulnerable by sharing his own experience. When we encounter difference, we respond to it in one of two ways. We either stay in relationship or we draw a circle around ourselves and make the other person an other. We either identify or we do not. Now, I understand that there are abusive situations where staying in relationship is not the right thing to do, and that is not this sermon, but I want to make sure that you know that I understand that. I was just recently at the Return on Inclusion Summit this past week, and I heard an excellent speaker named Steve Robbins. He's a neuropsychologist and deeply interested in diversity and inclusion work. He told us that we are constantly in a state of feeling either included or excluded, both with individuals and with groups. You're either in or you're out. And when you're out, he claims, the pain centers of our brain actually fire off like crazy, and we have to send some of our energy to go deal with those firing centers, which keeps us from being fully present, from being fully open and creative and forgiving and capable of assuming good intentions. When you're in, we find it easy to assume good intent and can spend our energy making and finding and creating connection. So for example, if you see a fish on the back of a car and they cut you off in traffic, they're just insensitive and hypocritical jerks. But if that fish has legs and feet, then you might just assume that they didn't see you. Whoops. When you can keep your eyes, or maybe it's your heart, focused on belonging, focused on including, on the largest system of including, the largest system of belonging. All souls, for example. All souls. We all belong to the human race. We are all fallible. We are all born and will die, and we can all give folks the benefit of the doubt. If we hold values that are widely inclusive, like people are inherently good, and give them the benefit of the doubt, it broadens our capacity to stay at the table. It broadens our capacity for discomfort. When we join a community like All Souls, we covenant to be together and to stay at the table, to stay in relationship, to redefine who is our neighbor. We're asked to widen our capacity in order to do that, especially when we are offended or we have offended. This week, I invite you to try and make connection, to make relationship your ultimate goal, in the face especially of being offended or when you unintentionally offend. Let nothing stand in your way. No offense.